No, it's got the recording, so I'm gonna pause.
All right. Welcome everybody to this month's hot topics. Today we're going to be having, for those of you who are new to this is a monthly presentation given by the League of Women Voters of Davidson County. Right now, you're probably not actually seeing me. You're only hearing me speak over a presentation, which is the presentation that will be given by Councilwoman Angie Henderson. Angie Henderson is a second-term Metro Council member and chair of the Metro Council's Charter Revision Committee. Today, she will be speaking about local policymaking in the shadow of the country's second most preemptive state legislature. I believe that means Tennessee's state legislature. This presentation will hopefully provide us all with an opportunity to learn more about not only the local legislative process, but also how it intersects with that Tennessee legislative process on a number of measures that have gained a lot of public support. Specifically, as you can see, I believe Councilwoman Henderson will be talking about some of her signature programs that she's put together about sidewalks, trees, Airbnbs, and also my assumption is on some of the requirements for developments. So with that, Ms. Henderson, please.
Thank you. I really appreciate you all having me today. I will clarify, I'm no longer chair of charter revision as of maybe 3 or 4 days ago. The vice mayor has reassigned all the committee chairs, but I continue to serve on our Public Works Committee, Parks, Library and Arts, have served on Budget and Finance, and have chaired our Public Works Committee and Parks Committee over the years. So I appreciate the introduction. Thank you. Let's see, I'm gonna get this slideshow going. Okay. Well, here we are in beautiful Nashville, Davidson County, Tennessee. And not more than a 10-minute walk apart from each other. Up the road, we've got City Hall, where your local legislative body serves, nonpartisan body. And then up the road, Capitol Hill, our partisan Republican supermajority legislature. And we are both policy-making bodies. And one would hope that we are working collaboratively. But as the topic of this alludes to, it is particularly, I think, difficult to legislate in Nashville in the shadow of preemption. And so, you know, we're both bodies trying to, you know, solve problems and serve our citizens. And we are, I think, increasingly, and you're seeing this across the country, tension and legislative preemption from state legislatures down to the local level, whether that is kind of prospectively, like in advance of anticipating, like, oh, these 2 states tried to do something, so we're going to get ahead of that and just shut that completely down. Or if it's responsive to legislation that's been passed that's perceived by the state legislature as, you know, something we don't want our cities doing. So we are very near to each other here in this capital city. Metro government was the first fully consolidated city-county government in the United States of America in 1963. We were prescient in that regard because we did not lose kind of our tax base to kind of typical, you know, suburban white flight type development as some of the other cities in the US did. That there are some good things about being city county consolidated, and there are some challenges with it. And one of the things I'll highlight in this presentation is that it's very difficult to legislate for Davidson County, because it's 526 square miles of a whole lot of different contexts, and it makes policy making particularly challenging. So Metro Council, as is your mayor, your vice mayor, we are nonpartisan and the legislative body of your local government. So local control. You see there's City Hall, Courthouse, Public Square, Diane Nash Plaza, and then Capitol Hill and our Tennessee legislature. Local governments are, subordinate to states, but we do have legal and political autonomy in many regards. Obviously, people are the ultimate power in democracy. And as the adage often says, kind of the best government is the government the closest to the people. So, we are a problem-solving body. We are making policy for our specific conditions and needs. As you all know, there are almost 700,000 Nashvillians now. We are 526 square miles, and we are the economic engine of this state. And so, we are also the 21st most populous city in the United States now. So as local legislators, we are tasked with zoning work, and that takes up a lot of district council members' time, but also, policy work that is responsive to challenges in the community. So there are kind of long-standing needs that need to be addressed from a policymaking standpoint, like say sidewalks were. We were decades and decades, maybe some 80 years behind on having good updated sidewalk requirements. And then you have something like an Airbnb or an Uber or ride share, those things that are known as kind of disruptors. And so then a city has got to really be nimble from a policy standpoint to respond to these new business models, because they really do have immense implications on a city proper. So if you look at something like an Uber and, the various approaches that cities took about regulating Uber. Uber is a corporate entity not wanting to share its data with cities, right? So how can we know if this is working for a city if the corporation won't share the data with the city for the business that operates within public right of way, right? And so, their lobbyists are trying to make sure that cities can't get that data and so on and so forth. And so when the data was finally acquired late into that business model, which is now very popular, right? Rideshare is kind of ubiquitous. What did it show? It increases traffic, right? It increases traffic. So, a lot of these disruptors are trying to get their foot in the door, like a Airbnb. They're giving kind of warm and fuzzy framing about their home sharing, and in truth, in the majority, it's kind of 24/7 mini hotels, and there can be some appropriate places for that, usually based on zoning, mixed use commercial areas. But I would venture to guess if you own a residential property in a neighborhood, you did not invest in that property anticipating that somebody would buy it next to you and get an annual permit and turn it into a 24/7 mini hotel. And so, I was hearing from my constituents, as were colleagues, this is a quality of life issue. I've got people showing up, pouring out of their Uber drunk at 1 a.m., having a party on the back deck. My kids can't sleep. They're accosting my kids in the backyard, that kind of stuff. So we as legislators have to respond to that and try to adjust that from a policy perspective. When those corporate entities don't feel that they're getting what they want, they will attempt to apply pressure at the local level. And then if you do pass what the city needs and they don't want, then they will go up to the state legislature and find a sponsor, typically in this scenario with short-term rentals or Airbnbs, a legislator in a town that doesn't have any. And so then he's going to tell Nashville and the whole state how it needs to be. And so that, there's kind of various pathways for different types of legislation where we're seeing preemption come to bear. And so while we do have one of the most preemptive legislatures, it is a problem, as you can see from the wheel of preemption, as I call it, compiled by the National League of Cities. This is looking at, we were talking earlier about rideshare, home sharing, Airbnb, HomeAway, VRBO, municipal broadband, discrimination, wages, paid leave. And these are just the things that they are tracking across all states. Preemption really is touching on all kinds of issues from, can you ban plastic bags at the grocery store, all the way to, up to kind of infrastructure level issues. I was at a site meeting this morning in my district about an intersection improvement and a sidewalk expansion, safe routes to schools, good work that needs to happen. When the community asks, how long is it going to take? The primary holdup is utility coordination, because through a preemptive state law, once you get the plans in place and you say to AT&T, I need you to move this pole or move these cabinets or whatever, they have 180 days to respond. And often they don't respond till the 179th day. So, we tried to pass some legislation called One Touch Make Ready that would have had, things moving on poles in kind of a more consolidated fashion. That was preempted. So, you just see it really all across the spectrum of the work that we do at the local level. It was noteworthy, I think, in the context of COVID. Right. So, the state saying, you must go back into session as a council, or making being remote particularly difficult. So we used to have a consent agenda for things like, stormwater abandonments and things like that, that, get 3 readings and go through committee and have plenty of attention. And, once you get them to 3rd reading, you don't really need to read them all out individually. But, per state law, in the context of the pandemic, we had to do every single one of those bills individually, meaning that we were meeting till 12, 1, 2 a.m. For a big chunk of the pandemic. So really, even at kind of a granular level and practical level, the state is often kind of reaching down in a way, or really reaching across, making it not easy at the local level. So I spoke a little bit earlier about kind of, prospectively removing local control. ALEC, the American Legislative, I'm not sure what the E is, Council, but they have annual meetings, perhaps more, with state legislators who only pay a mere $50 annually to be a part of their organization, so that they can take these bills back to their state legislatures to pass legislation that is advantageous to particular business interests. Here in Nashville, we have the Beacon Center, which is part of a larger network of right-wing think tanks. And so we've seen the Beacon Center spearhead our short-term rental residential phase-out legislation up on the Hill. They've worked to do that. And they've also spearheaded the opposition to sidewalk legislation. So the Local Solutions Support Center, supportdemocracy.org, National League of Cities, they provide a lot of good resources on preemption patterns that they're seeing comparatively in other governments, and also maybe of interest to you are sites like ALEC Exposed and sourcewatch.org. Okay. Does anybody have at this juncture just questions about preemption? There's more coming. I'm going to talk about particular legislation, sidewalks, and so forth. But anything I can clarify at this juncture for anyone? Okay. We will keep moving on ahead.
By the way, just so everyone knows, in case there's a problem, you can certainly raise your hand if you're interested at any point, and we can, call upon you, I guess, is what you do when you raise your hand.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I'd appreciate that, Karen. If somebody has a question, please do feel free to raise your hand. On my screen, I can kind of only see a column of sort of 4 among us. So I can't see the full group to know if anybody's raising their hand or have a question. So if you'll relay those, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, so defending Nashville's sidewalk bill. So I ran for office on a state streets platform to deliver improved sidewalk policy. It was my primary motivation in running for office. I had served with Walk Bike Nashville, volunteered with a group called the Green Hills Action Partners. And, so I was hosting annual Walk Nashville Week events in the Green Hills area, highlighting good infrastructure, of which there was not much, missing infrastructure, of which there was a lot, bad infrastructure, likewise, plenty of that to go around. We'd invite our council member, we try to get kind of a corresponding news story. And so as I share with folks, that was good work. It was work I enjoyed, but it was very incremental. And so as my children got older, I came to realize if I can't stand in the breach every time on this house or that and ask people and developers, oh, would you please build a sidewalk? And that's effectively what our organization was doing in Green Hills in an effort to implement the Green Hills Urban Village Plan, which called for sidewalk connectivity, street trees, public artwork, and a whole host of things like wayfinding and so forth. So it became very clear to me that to effectuate those goals, you were going to have to, run for office and deliver that policy. As I alluded to earlier on kind of the first slide when we were talking about how big Davidson County is, 526 square miles, city county consolidated, urban, rural, old city of Nashville that was sidewalked, suburban area that has ditch infrastructure, right? So in the old city of Nashville, stormwater and sewer are together in the street. Out in suburbia, stormwater is in ditches. And so that means any sidewalk project, about 70% of the cost is stormwater infrastructure. And so when you are 80 years behind and you have a suburban sprawled development pattern, it is a long, long way to get your city completely sidewalked. And so you really have to come up with a strategic framework that it doesn't just say, willy-nilly sidewalks everywhere, but establishes a strategic framework for doing that. And so this was a major legislative effort in 2017. It was affirmed and supported by the Walk and Bike Strategic Plan and the Policy Committee, subcommittee that I chaired for that plan. We had 37 co-sponsors. That was very intentional on my part because I knew this was going to be a heavy policy lift and it was going to be up to a lot of challenge and frustration. And so it was very important that it would not be, my bill or 5 or 10 council members, but all of our bills. So 37 co-sponsors, me being another, that's 38. There were only 2 council members that did not sign on to this bill. Yet when it did pass unanimously. And so that's a strong statement, right? When you kind of get to the Board of Zoning Appeals later, and home builders are kind of pressing back on it and, saying, this is bad and I don't want to do this. It's like, well, all 40 members of the city council, think that we should be doing this. So preemption on this legislation has loomed for years. And I feel like I have spent, and that's, that is a true frustration in being a Nashville legislator, is you work very hard to deliver legislation that has been, stakeholded, meetings with staff, you work really hard on something so that it is strong and legally defensible and all those things. And then you got to worry every year, what's the bill that's going to get filed. And then some of you who follow the league's legislative reports and watch the session on the Hill will know well about, but it was new to me, being kind of a neophyte in this legislative space when I ran for office. Caption bills that you just can't even tell what they are until later in the session, when people can go into conference rooms with nobody paying attention and say, oh, well, we're going to make this bill be about preempting sidewalk regulations in the big 4 cities, say, or maybe all the cities. So, I think one thing that's interesting also kind of from a preemptive perspective is the state legislature requires local municipal bodies. I cannot call up a colleague or meet with them and discuss our policy goals, things that I would like to work on with them, parking policy, some additional tree policy. That is not allowed. I typically interpret it more as kind of pending active legislation, cannot be talked about, understandably. But we have really painted ourselves into a corner, and I think unduly constrained ourselves to even be talking kind of proactively about the policy that we want to do. But surprise, surprise, the state legislature has none of those restrictions, right? They can meet and talk in back room and all that kind of stuff. But at the local level, again, it's not that anybody's doing backroom wheeling dealing. You just really want to talk to your colleagues about how can we work together to create good policy. So we have dodged bullets for multiple legislative sessions. Lastly, it was kind of quasi, I guess, sent to kind of summer study. And the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations kind of opined and studied on the legislation that would have been preemptory and did not recommend it. They said that our legislation was constitutionally defensible. So that was good to get that report back. That is a body that does, research on behalf of the state legislature. So that was a real positive. But what I am often kind of struggling with is that, each few years, new folks move to Nashville to be on the television news. And then a certain cohort of home builders are like, hey, have you heard about this sidewalk legislation? It's so horrible. Like, here's one of the pictures they love to use there. The sidewalk, supposedly to nowhere. It's not to nowhere, it's a network. Somebody's going to build the next sidewalk. We have to start somewhere. So, and that news story gets trotted out like over and over and over. And so a new news person will reach out to me. Hey, I talked to somebody at the Beacon Center, or I talked to this person at the Southern Law, whatever, their kind of larger umbrella group. And they are suing Nashville now. And so, I spend a lot of time having to do news interviews to kind of disabuse folks of these false narratives. so many of these news stories have been done that these gentlemen here who are working, I guess the Beacon Center kind of picked them out for their lawsuit. You know, it's just pretty frustrating, I would say. So let's see, we had a 2019 update to the bill. Beacon Center would assert, when I was reading their website the other night, that that's because of the lawsuits. But we had always promised an update to that legislation. When you do countywide legislation like that, that is you know, particularly challenging, you're going to need to tweak it. And so we delivered that. We listened to home builders and various stakeholders, and I think made the bill even better. And so we have prevailed in 2 court cases. And about a month ago, Metro Legal went up to the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals to defend our sidewalk legislation again. And I hope they are successful. But I will tell you that some legislation, or rather a court ruling, has happened in North Carolina, which also now has a very preemptive legislature, that, you know, isn't great. And so it doesn't really, of course, that's North Carolina, but that's one that's not going really in a good direction. So I hope we'll prevail and we won't have to go to the Supreme Court, but wouldn't that be interesting? All because these 2 guys and some other home builders think that the city should build 100% of the sidewalks in the city. I try to remind folks about the historical development patterns and sidewalk requirements that cities all across the country have had for years, and that all these sidewalks were built through home development and otherwise, not by cities. So people sometimes don't like to look at history. So anyway, that is our kind of just an illustration of some of the stuff that we are dealing with. So Title 17 is where I've done most of my policy work. That is Metro's zoning code. And that sets out the rules for land use, and that touches on things like parking and sidewalks and landscaping and trees and signage, and you know, sidewalks, street trees, short-term rentals, all that is in Title 17 of the Metro Code. So every county in Tennessee has a countywide general plan coordinated by their planning department. And depending on the size of the city, a whole host of strategic plans. Nashville has a lot of plans and a lot of redoing plans. And I think Nashvillians are getting kind of tired of plans, but that's what happens when you have, you know, 3 mayors in 5 years. And so, you know, we've already updated our walk and bike strategic plan that I mentioned earlier. The thing I really liked about that plan was it had such a strong policy piece in it. And I really do think it's incumbent upon us as legislators, you know, not just to do a plan and you know, put it on the shelf, but to really work the plan and let it inform policy, let it inform capital investment. And when I was vice chair and chair of Public Works Committee, I did hold an annual hearing about implementation of the walk and bike strategic plan. And I do worry over this recent volatility and with new plans and plans upon plans, and that accountability and transparency is especially challenging. So part of the countywide general plan is the major and collector street plan. That is crucial for sidewalk policy. It really is the framework on which the sidewalk policy is built. And in motion was our transit plan that informed the transportation plan and the referendum and the new transportation plan. I was looking at my big fat transportation plan over here to see what year that was, 2020. The plan to play parks strategic plan, which I will say I don't think it's a really good plan. I don't think it's being put into use. I don't see the plan to play coming to bear in how we make our capital investments on the park side and how we manage those strategically. So again, it's not just about doing the plan and checking the box. You have to create a plan that is going to be workable and accountable. So again, these plans, whether it be the transit plan, the walk and bike plan, they were all foundational to both the sidewalk bill and the street tree bill that I passed. So, when you look in the recitals of the legislation and you kind of make the case for these sidewalk requirements, that's important to do, because I will tell you, in court now, when we're trying to defend this legislation, that legislative intent, that strategic framework built on strategic plans and the countywide general plan is how we gird up the requirements that we make. Here is that major and collector street plan, kind of zoomed in, not quite getting the whole county. And the Nashville Next centers, we have 3 tiers of centers based on density that you can see there, kind of in dark orange, a middle orange, and almost a pale peach. And so the framework for the sidewalk bill uses this major and collector street plan because the requirements are both aligned with the type of development. So multifamily and commercial development everywhere is going to require sidewalks, no exceptions. Single and 2-family home building, and that's what was very new. We had not done that for maybe 80 years as a city, requiring sidewalks with single family. But again, we can't just say every house everywhere, right? What we want to say is, within centers and within a 1/4 mile buffer to centers. I don't know how Davidson County legislated before GIS mapping. The ability to do that now and to kind of map on to that framework from a policy standpoint is really crucial for us, being as big and diverse as to our land use and development patterns. So what you're seeing here is collector streets are in purple. Your arterials are in red. I believe that's state routes in yellow. And then the blue is also arterial, but are high capacity transit corridors. So again, really literally a strategic framework on which to build the policy. And so the street tree bill was an expansion of the sidewalk bill and basically said everywhere that sidewalks are required in centers, so too are street trees required. And that's important because we want those centers to be walkable and dense. And what makes a street more walkable? Shade is important. The buffer of the tree is important to just the feeling of safety. And so, yeah, so this is just one of the many components of that general plan that help us do the legislative work that we do in Title 17. This is the urban zoning overlay there in red. You see some of our satellite cities in gray, Belmead, Forest Hills, Oak Hill, Berry Hill, and Goodlettsville up at the tippy top. I'm not sure if you can see that on your screen. I have in my district all the city of Forest Hills, 2/3 of the city of Oak Hill, and I'm adjacent to Belmead. And so what that means for our public streets, that's really challenging, right? Because those cities, they administer their own zoning. They set their own speed limits. I have streets that we did a countywide speed limit reduction on neighborhood streets to 25 miles per hour. I am still trying to convince the city of Forest Hills on streets that actually share the same name and are part in Metro and part there. Would they like to pilot 25 miles per hour? That's what their neighbors want. But I'm struggling to get that. So again, another layer of complexity for a policy in Metro. And so, all this legislation that we're talking about, it doesn't affect these satellite cities. Nothing in Title 17 does. And the urban zoning overlay, it's another one of those elements that we use legislatively for our framework. So for the most part, though it has been of late expanded, and that did kind of complicate the implementation of the sidewalk bill, but the UZO used to mean the old city of Nashville. So we talked at the top of the presentation about the city-county consolidation in 1963, and you really can see that distinction. When you are in the city, you can kind of see where the sidewalks stopped, right? And so the legislation was built assuming the UZO as it was when the legislation passed. Some council members did expand the UZO in an effort to kind of garner the sidewalk regs, frankly, but that really kind of threw things a little bit for a loop, especially in the area of the Nations, which didn't have any stormwater infrastructure and was a hot mess. And so the requirements in the urban zoning overlay were different than they were out in suburbia. So in the urban zoning overlay, which was historically about 75% sidewalked, you had to build in certain circumstances. Out in the periphery, if you did not have an abutting sidewalk or there was not another sidewalk on the block face, you could contribute in lieu of just construction. But you were also still required, if needed, to make a mandatory dedication of right-of-way for future construction of sidewalks. So I know a lot of citizens sometimes feel like, oh my gosh, they got out of building the sidewalk and I'm mad about that. But please know they did contribute to the pedestrian benefit zone. They did contribute pedestrian easement for future construction and right-of-way if needed to build to, again, our major and collector street plan standard. So we really are garnering and harnessing this development boom. And I'm so glad we passed the legislation when we did in 2017, because, to talk to planning, that can had been kicked, and it just always seemed too late. We're another decade behind. So, policy making in reverse is super challenging. So this is another policy area established in the general plan. These are our conservation policy areas. As you can see, they follow our waterways, our forests, our areas of slope that are more than 20%. And you really do see to the west and the north and the southwest areas of good tree canopy. And that's why I felt it was so important from a policy perspective that we, in the process of kind of updating our what we called cluster lots, that it was important to frame that or reframe that as conservation policy. So if we're going to say you can have a few more units and you can put them over here outside of this beautiful cluster of trees or this hillside forest over here, that really is a win for us environmentally, because the periphery of our county through subdivision development, right? Car oriented, house, little boxes on the hillside everywhere. It's not really great for the environment. So we really needed to have kind of a reset on how we did that. And so that again is Title 17 policy, particular to our zoning code, but a fair amount of pushback on that from home builders, subdivision developers, who again, went out to the news media and said it was going to destroy affordable housing, right? Because affordable housing is really important to the community right now. So if the home builders say that this conservation policy is going to destroy affordable housing, then it's like, oh goodness, maybe we don't need to pass this. But happily, colleagues did pass it. So our conservation development is now mandatory for sites that have even just 10% of natural area or resource. That can be stands of mature trees. It does not have to be hillsides or, and so that's floodplain, that's streams, that's natural slopes, that's problem soils or slipping soils with our kind of geology that we have, wetlands, cedar glades, historic sites, cemeteries, archaeology sites, and so forth. So that's recent policy that we've passed that I'm really proud of. And this shows a little bit about kind of what we had before with cluster lot and what we moved to. And so, you know, this is moving from optional to required. It really was a significant change. And I think the planning department and staff, they really did a great job managing stakeholder meetings. And there really, in the end, was not as much pushback as had been anticipated, right? And so when you are working in Title 17 in this space, home building, that kind of stuff, you really are especially mindful in Tennessee of legislative preemption, right? Because the home builder lobby is very strong. And if they're not happy, they're going to go up on the Hill. And, you know, that's always a concern, is that they're going to dip down into Title 17 and take away that ability from cities. So then this is pretty technical, but it's just some more of the provisions of that legislation. And so, you know, trees and forests and our canopy are under a lot of challenges right now. And those are both, you know, development oriented and environment. For infill development, kind of single and two family, bad construction site practice, but we have really no current protections due to state law. And I feel strongly, if we're going to address that single and two family space, as I know many constituents and citizens want to do, I do think we were right to focus on subdivision development at our periphery and those bigger tracts of land and get a handle on that before we addressed single and two family. But I feel strongly, given the way state law is set up, that we are going to need to update our stormwater regulations such that we no longer will have kind of it's not an arbitrary threshold, but at present, if you have 800 additional square feet of impervious surface on your home build, you're going to trigger those infill regulations. And in those infill regulations, you can say, okay, to meet your stormwater requirement, you know, there's an incentive, retain this mature tree. Right. So if you want to not build a little stormwater retention rain garden, maybe you can keep your 3 mature trees, protect them out to their drip line, and we can work it that way. And there were a fair number in a companion bill to conservation development. We had some tree code updates because the conservation development bill is requiring mandatory protection of those natural resources. And if they're lost, the tree dies, whatever, it's got to be replaced 2 to 1. And so those provisions went into our general tree code, and thus it is ready. And some other things about utility lines, water lines, gas lines from the street go into the house, can't cut through roots. So we did some actually granular improvements in the tree code that were aligned rightly with the conservation development policy, but that will serve us well as we move forward in the single and two family space. And so additionally, I hope you all have heard about the emerald ash borer epidemic. That is going to affect from 8 to 10% of our canopy. So, you know, please do be mindful of that. Look at your yard, figure that out. And if you have a beloved ash tree, treat it. You can treat it in the trunk with some chemicals, but it is very effective. But also to just plant trees. We've got to plant more trees. Root Nashville, Nashville Tree Conservation Corps, Nashville Tree Foundation are all great organizations to get engaged with, to follow policy related to trees, and to volunteer to plant trees. And as well, the Nashville Tree Conservation Corps has a really great tree sale every fall, winter that I encourage you all to participate in. Really sizable, nice, healthy trees. They will bring them to your yard and they will plant them for you, right? So if you got kind of a mental barrier on, I don't know how to plant this tree, you could check that box. So I hope you'll all resolve to have at least one tree planted in your yard this coming fall and winter. And so with that, I will take any questions that you may have.
Angie, thank you so much. That was a very deep dive on some very important things. I will mention that with our organization, we have a number of people who are very involved in the tree concerns as well. So we've been doing a lot of that with Roseanne and Barbara on the Environment Committee. So those, we just, so if anybody is interested.
And is that Barbara Devaney?
Barbara Gay.
Barbara, okay.
Yeah.
I know Barbara Devaney was also active with you all. She's my
probably there's probably another Barbara, but
District 34 Beautification Commissioner. So yes.
Well, so I'm just saying that we've been involved with that. I know that Roseanne is being pushes that. We make sure that we get involved in tree planting every year. I will say there are a couple of questions. One is a question that has come in. What is the motivation of the Tennessee legislature? Is it for this preemption? I mean,
I think it's kind of multifold. I mean, certainly there is just sort of corporate influence, I would say. So, your Ubers, your Airbnbs, your utility and communications, your home builders. And so, their narrative is that, we're the big bad blue city, we're over regulatory, we're not business friendly. And so, we need to be set right, and we need to back off of business, and, the state's going to kind of tell us what to do. And then, in our hyper partisan political space, we are a nonpartisan body. But I would say, in truth, probably the majority of my colleagues identify as Democrats. I really, really though feel it's so important that municipal governance be nonpartisan. I think it's a real shame that we have partisan school boards now. Obviously, that was something that was kind of, pushed down from the state as well. And so, it's a little bit of the political antagonism, like, we need to have kind of an enemy, we need to have somebody to say, we're right and we're great and we're the state and we're conservative and we're fiscally responsible, and Nashville, you're over regulatory and fiscally irresponsible. It just it kind of follows narratives,
Then another question has come in. If you have any models of other metro areas in a state environment, preemptive environment, that have been successful?
I would say in talking to folks in national media that kind of follow walk bike policy, I feel like if I had a little more time to kind of pull things together and participate in some national conferences, I honestly think our legislation for a city of our size and complexity, with a suburban development model kind of working backwards, is, in talking to folks, they really do say it is nationally noteworthy policy. And so, we certainly looked around to see if we could kind of find things in other cities. I'm always doing that, whether on tree policy or otherwise. And whoever was posing the question is right. You do want to look to cities as closely similar to your own, because often I will have constituents share with me, well, in Farragut, Tennessee, or in Belmead, they do this, or, you know, and I have to tell them, like, Belmead is 3 square miles, you know, Farragut's 2 square miles, 5 square miles, like, you know, Davis County is 526 square miles, y'all. Like that, you know, that is just not analogous to, you know, from an implementation and enforcement standpoint, from a policy perspective. So that is a good question. I don't know. I did not look to a particular model city on our sidewalk policy. No.
Another question is about whether they're working with the state. My assumption is, given there are lots of regulations about things around schools, can you require that there be sidewalks specifically for safety around schools?
You know, I think that is a good question. We did look at, when we mapped out our sidewalk requirements, I mentioned those centers, right, which were mappable. Obviously schools would be GIS mappable, as would be parks. And so we started to look, because we had done centers and also a 1/4 mile buffer outside of centers, right? Because ostensibly you're wanting people to walk into utilizing the resources in those centers. Likewise, you're wanting people to walk to parks and schools. When we mapped that, it was just like, whoa. I mean, that just like kind of took it to a whole nother level. And we were already making a pretty heavy lift on those requirements. I do think in time, as this legislation continues to get its feet underneath it, we're doing better on our capital sidewalk delivery. Safe routes to school. I was just, again, that site meeting I was discussing, about an intersection improvement and sidewalk extension. I've talked to NDOT a lot about, you know, not being so siloed and saying, oh, you know, this is a intersection improvement, but it's an intersection improvement near a school. So let's optimize them for safe routes to school. Let's make sure we get all the safe crossings. If we're going to invest in a sidewalk, we've got to give people the safe pathways to get to it. And so, you know, the sidewalk legislation with those pedestrian benefit zones, those funds, you know, because folks will say like, oh, well, it's not enough and it's too low and the contribution in lieu needs to be higher, but it's not just for sidewalks. It can be a safe pedestrian crossing. It is a pedestrian benefit zone, trying to make it more safely walkable in those areas. But I do concur. I think schools and kids are always a good place to partner up with the state. What I would like to see the state doing, and we've seen some success in other cities and states and partnerships, is automated speeding enforcement in school zones. And so automated speeding enforcement is not enabled at the state. But I do think there is maybe a special provision with schools. So I will look at that. I am always looking for ways, you know, whether it's flood prevention, stormwater, you know, increasingly cities the size of Murfreesboro and Clarksville, they're having big city problems. And so through Tennessee Municipal League and otherwise, we need to be building those partnerships. We don't need to be the big bad blue dot. We don't need to be the big 4 cities. We've really got to work more closely with our peer mid-tier cities.
Thank you. I'm going to point out that we're very close to 1 o'clock. Angie, will you be able to stay for a while?
I am able to stay, yes.
Well,
yes.
I am willing to continue to keep this going for, because I would say there's an enormous amount of interest, and I'm just reading off. I don't even have my list of questions. I won't do it, I promise, I'll let it go, but there's plenty going here. So I'm going to just keep going until Angie, I don't know, maybe she might pop, you know, if she falls over, we know we've gone too far.
Here until all questions are answered and folks are willing to stay. I'm happy to do it.
I don't think you'll have a problem there. I think there are a lot of people. So the other, so we're still, I'm trying to figure out if I have other sidewalk questions. One thing I would ask about is, my assumption is, historically, when I've looked at the issues of sidewalks and walkability and bikeability, one of the things that's super important is data about deaths and other sorts of things that happen along certain roadways. And in so doing, my assumption is that I believe that what they did with that is that some of those would get like front front and center because you would find that there was a particularly dangerous intersection or something. Is that still the case, Angie?
One would have hoped. I think now with our new Vision Zero plan, I have some criticisms of that plan, but data is not among them. I think the data there is really great. Our metropolitan planning organization, re-acronymed as GNRC, which I find super confusing. I tell them they sound like realtors now, but our metropolitan planning organization. So they're the conduit for federal dollars in the transportation space. And I have served on their bicycle and pedestrian advocacy committee. I actually attended one of their meetings to present about sidewalks and enjoyed the meeting and stayed to listen, and then said to them, you know what? You don't have a single policymaker or legislator in this group when I looked at the roster. So it was great folks, you know, doing good work as staff and public works folks in a wide variety of cities in Middle Tennessee. Can learn a lot from them. But again, as the sidewalk legislation shows, I mean, you can't capital invest your way out of the problem that we've created with suburban sprawl. You just can't. So it's both and. You have to elevate the requirements and expand those and strengthen them, while also optimizing your capital delivery. And you're absolutely right, Karin, from a prioritization standpoint, it kind of always should have been that way and kind of is, but sometimes it was a little bit kind of left hand, right hand, like as far as MNPD and the platform through which they took crash reports. You know, they lived somewhere and they kind of went to the state, but there wasn't really the communication across to local priorities to really use that data. And that is now happening through the Vision Zero plan. So that is a good thing.
Well, in my district, we have Charlotte. And Charlotte, we can't control very much because it's not local, it's a state. And so we have troubles as well. So, yeah.
Right. Nobody wants to bike in those bike lanes on Charlotte. I'm not, you know, I did it once with the walk bike policy ride. And, you know, I'll just be forthright. Maybe I was a little out of shape, and the route that we took, we had a big hill and I just had to stop, y'all. I couldn't make it up the hill. That was pre-e-bikes. I was on an old B-cycle pedal bike. And so I got separated from the group. They went on through the light en masse, you know, safety in numbers on that Charlotte bikeway, which is, you know, it's paint. It's paint. It's not infrastructure. Yeah. And I spent maybe, I don't even think I spent 1 second that bike line. I was like, I'm riding on the sidewalk. Sorry. Like, you know, I never begrudge anybody in a context like that doing that. You know, I'm a polite. I'm going to say on your left, I'll go slow. I'm not going to mow over pedestrians. But yeah, it is especially challenging on state routes. I would say the multimodal division at TDOT. I know some work was done making sure that local government is getting a 3-year paving horizon, right? So I've had scenarios in my district where I didn't know the state route was going to be paved. You know, maybe we need some bikeway improvements. I had been working with merchants and they wanted a road diet to kind of calm down their business district. And I think kind of on the front end of COVID or whatever, you know, not being out and about as much, and a constituent called me up and she was like, they're out here paving Highway 100, you know, and so I knew that they had paved it up to a certain point, but I didn't realize they were going to come on down into my district. And so, you know, supposedly 3-year paving horizons so we can coordinate on projects. But I've seen that not working some. So I would say the relationship with TDOT seems to be very much improving. They are, through their design standards, moving away from, you know, a sidewalk right on the right of way. They have been amenable when we've sort of inserted ourselves, or I've inserted myself out in Bellevue. They were going to build one of their kind of old style sidewalks right on the road. I worked with NDOT staff. We went out. It now has a furnishing zone. It's set back a little bit further. That presents some challenges sometimes with mowing and things. And so, you know, it's like, it's always more kind of complicated than you think it is. But I do think there is kind of a good faith effort there now to work
And I
together.
think it sounds to me like by doing that, you're also you're educating people about that there can be a difference as well.
Right.
So there is a point that was made about the requirements when it comes to high schools being developed. Mary Beth, would you like, I'm going to unmute you. I might have muted you. Can you unmute
Hey, Mary Beth.
There you go. Why don't you ask your question, because it looks quite, or have a little solid, whatever you do back and forth with each other. Whatever that.
Yeah, glad to be here and support my friend Angie. But the question around, is there a requirement for sidewalk construction around schools? So I believe MNPS, everything that they do, of course, gets adopted by the Board of Education and your elected representative on the board, but they have a formally adopted policy similar to Metro general government buildings, where they have to build their buildings to LEED Silver, and that inevitably would require sidewalk construction around the campus. But for example, I'm from the Bellevue area, and Angie represents a lot of that area, but Bellevue Middle School, Councilman Rosenberg has been very vocal in advocating for some sidewalk construction on Old Harding Road there because of the pedestrian counts and the need to access, that school on foot. But, there's plenty of sidewalk on, I think is it Ball Road, Angie, that Bellevue's on?
Yeah, there's Baugh. It's also on 70 South. It's not the greatest sidewalk. It's right on the road, but yes, I mean, it goes out 70 South to BAUGH Ball Road, past Red Caboose Park and over that way.
Right. Yeah. So that's a good example of a campus that got built with sidewalks in front of it, but then the surrounding connectivity to the school is a sidewalk desert that's creating some safety challenges. And so, in the past, there's been a little bit of a area of contention between MNPS because they, even though Metro supplies their budget, they get it and they do what they want with it in their capital program, as dictated, out of central office. And so they'll incorporate the sidewalk construction for the campus itself into their capital budget for whatever the new school is, but then look to Public Works, now NDOT, to connect, the surrounding infrastructure under their capital budget, as opposed to building it into theirs. So, for the new Bellevue High School, that is, I don't know if any of you have kind of driven out to where that high school is under construction, but school siting policy is an area that, the Board of Education could probably make some clarity on, as a lot of other jurisdictions around the country have done, where, we need to be citing schools close to where the students who are going to be accessing those campuses actually live, so that they don't have to get in and out of there exclusively by driving themselves or having a caregiver shuttle them. So Bellevue High School, maybe there was an athletic field discussion around that. Angie might know more, but a lot of times that's the case with high schools where they're looking for a lot of land to have their athletic fields, and that makes them be located away from any other activity centers where there could be good transportation infrastructure. So in that particular case, MTA was saying the whole time, we do not have transit service to this area of the county. It is literally on the Cheatham County line. It's past the Regal Bellevue Cinema. So I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, I guess they're going to have to fund MTA to expand service out there if students want to ride transit, or what, or anybody to ride transit. Parents who have a child, through the zoning policy, maybe they're coming from another area of town. I know there's kind of a flexibility in the zoning policy, but certainly there's no sidewalks out in that area right now.
Right. Yeah. That is really, I mean, I recall Mary Beth going to a Cumberland Region Tomorrow event when Tokes Omashakin, who is now, I think, like CalDOT, like California Department of Transit, heading that. I think he had been doing bike ped in the dean administration and then had gone over to the state at that time. And he was really leaning into land use, right? So all the way back to Title 17, you know, our car dependency is because of how we have zoned stuff, and we have separated uses, and we put all the residential over here. And, you know, you can't walk to a grocery store in suburbia. You know, you can't walk to your super massive regional high school. And, you know, when Hillsborough had their conversation, they had some really interesting community charrettes quite a while ago, I think before I ever ran for council. So we're talking, you know, 8-9 years ago. And I hadn't really hoped that they might go with a more urban vertical model of a school. And that's kind of what I was hoping in Bellevue too, because where that middle school campus was so centrally located. But that is, again, an awkward tension in a 526 square mile county, when you look at peer schools and private schools and they're out at the rural periphery. I think I have like 22 faith communities, multiple private schools, you know, and they're out here because there's land, you know, or was at the time. And, you know, for the, Mary Beth alluded to the sports fields, et cetera. So, you know, we kind of keep doing the wrong thing. And sometimes we do the wrong thing a little bit better. And sometimes we do the wrong thing worse. And so, yeah, land use really, that's why, you know, I try to bring so much emphasis from a policy perspective to Title 17. It really does touch and affect everything all across the spectrum, from environmental issues to livability to health.
Yeah, and I'll just point out that I believe the Bellevue High School capital construction was, if you do the math, around 40% of that, the mayor's capital spending plan that was in. So, you know, there should be some requirements, I think, around if they're, you know, pulling that amount of money over other priorities, such as, you know, sidewalk construction or upgrading MTA's fleet or whatever it is, Metro General, you know, that they, you know, really think about their policy for incorporating these assets better into the community and maybe combining them with some other uses, so that we can, you know, start to act like the urban area that we're becoming, given the size of the city that we are today.
Agreed.
So we just ran into another whole thing by doing this, which is citing of other kinds of assets, for example, schools, but that's also going to be in the context of citing other developments, presumably, and issues around sewer, stormwater, you know, all those kinds of things, including, and also transportation. So clearly within the planning process, those kinds of issues come up. So sidewalks are one part of that. And that's why I'm assuming that the reason that you say that you are going to revisit what you've put in is that as these things come up, because yet another, whatever happens, the question of, you know, another, I'm sorry, whatever, but like the high school, for example, this particular example will probably have an effect on the next round of what that sidewalk thing is going to be. So I think that's a really good example, both positive and negative. Sounds like I mean, one way of doing that as an educator is to say it's a learning moment.
It's a very expensive learning moment. Yes. Yep.
Well, I'm 60 something years old and I have so many of those still. I find it, and actually, if it doesn't hit me upside the head, I feel better about it. So I guess there are some questions that aren't just about now the sidewalks, and there are some about the tree requirements that you've had, and specifically around native plantings versus exotics.
Yep.
I would add from again, because there are some people in League who are also involved in the grow wild, or not grow wild, but it's the whatever wilding your
yes, natural yards. Yeah. Berkeley Allen did some enabling legislation for that. Yep.
And having codes called on them. Like little old ladies
Oh.
getting like, because they have, instead of 8 inches, their front yard is 12. So anyway, so if you'd like to
That's-
have some comments.
Yeah, no, that is not supposed to be happening. Berkeley Allen, I think, I can't recall if that was early in last term, but we have enabled natural yards. You have to kind of, I believe,
You have
kind
to
of
register.
register with codes, let them know like this is what I
Yes.
am doing with my yard. I'm not doing a traditional suburban mow it every week. This is intentional on my part and it is managed, et cetera. But yeah, I think that's very important. I am the only person in my neighborhood. I have a lovely yard. I have trees. It is maintained, but I do not put Lawn or True Green or whatever on my yard. And I am the only person on my street who doesn't. So, that means in the spring, I've got a yard full of clover and chickweed and all that kind of stuff. Those are flowers as far as I'm concerned. But that is something I do try to communicate with constituents about. You shouldn't just default presume that, your yard has to be uniform and bright green. Right. Suburban development model is not particularly sustainable. One of the benefits to us as a city, though, is our suburban development pattern does hold a lot of our mature trees, right? And so there is a kind of an upside in that space if we can maintain them through development. And I think in areas of my district, Mr. Druffle's district and others that have, our S20, R40, R80, those really larger lot sizes, you absolutely can build your brand new big, mega mansion, whatever, and still have plenty of space to protect trees to the drip line with good site practice. So it can be done. And so I think we are moving in that direction. I think kind of pandemic, COVID, multiple administrations. I mean, this is something that I had identified and other colleagues I know want to work on. And I think there's various efforts in progress, but I do encourage constituents in the meantime, if you are neighbor to a residence that is building or whatever, like, yes, no, it's not, the law that they have to do this or that. But, really thinking about it from a tree-friendly builder perspective, like it behooves those builders. I've seen too much in my district where I am driving by, I know that tree is not being protected. I see the cars parking on it. I see the stacks of bricks. I will stop by a time or two. I'll try to talk to the foreman. I'll call them and I'll say, hey, look, it's going to be an asset to your home when you sell this if you have 3 big, beautiful, mature 60-foot trees in the front yard. And if you keep treating them like this, after somebody buys this home from you, they're going to move in, and a year later, they're going to have to spend $3,000, $4,000 per tree to take down those dead trees because you didn't, home builder, treat them right. So I've reached out to the home builder community and have talked to some of our nonprofits about kind of that education side of it, that it really would, I think, behoove home builders. I'd love to see them kind of come together with something like, a tree-friendly builder seal, something like that. We've absolutely got to elevate the requirements. I'm not saying just education solves it. It doesn't. But as we work towards that, it can't hurt.
Yeah, one of the things that I've heard from a number of foresters who've been looking at Davidson County and Nashville is that we do have another problem. Obviously we have a number of them, but I think we will lose most, if not all, of our ashes. It's very likely. So those will have to
10%, 8 to 10% of our canopy. I think 10% is originally estimated. Now with the complete tree survey, I think maybe it's closer to 8, which is happy, but I mean, it's still thousands and thousands and thousands of trees.
I'm from Wisconsin, and I came from a city that was called the City of Elms, and they're all gone.
Yes.
So that's going to be an issue. So you have to, I don't think there's a way around it. The other thing I've heard is that the maturity, we have old trees. Mm-hmm. So we will be increasingly losing those trees because trees do have a lifespan. So there is also an enormous amount of our already extant trees that are needing to be soon will have to go because they're going to. So then the question does become that Diane has asked about as we move forward, are we incorporating into plantings that go in if you have to remove a tree and you put in trees just because it was a tree like a red bud? I think this person is saying, Diane is mentioning red buds. Does it have to be a red bud, or can it be something else? Or God forbid, please, no Bradford pears, please, 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 please.
Yes, you cannot plant a Bradford pear. That is not on our approved tree list. You're not getting any tree density credit for any of those kind of trees. Our Metro Tree Advisory Committee vets the approved Metro tree list, if not annually, on a pretty regular cycle, to make sure, and also just to be kind of mindful of, what are trends in our nursery community. You do start to see kind of patterns like, oh my God, if I see one more, of this type of tree, like, it does seem to get narrow sometimes. Obviously, we want diversity, to your point. When a city only has elms, or when a city only has ash, and you get an epidemic like this, it's really devastating. I am seeing in my district, I have a really, really high concentration of ash. But also with these major storm events, we had the derecho. So our area of the community was not touched by our most recent devastating tornado. But I will tell you, the derecho that followed in May was pretty devastating over here.
We lost 7 in my backyard right here.
Yeah.
Seven, what are they called? Hackberries. And as one of the people that I came to have look at taking down one said, you're not going back in your house, are you? Until take down.
Ooh, yes.
Because luckily one hackberry held another. Yeah.
But we had, a few years prior had what they called at that time, they weren't labeling it a derecho, and I don't know what the thresholds, but they had a straight line wind event. That was several years prior to this derecho in my neighborhood. I was out of power for 5 days, and on kind of historic Page Road with stone walls, massive, beautiful oak trees, bam, 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 down across the street. And so we've lost mature trees to storm events, to your point, well taken, end of life, so I think sometimes, West Nashville, land of beautiful mature trees, we rest on our laurels a little bit. We certainly and rightly are disappointed when we see developers not protecting trees. And so we have to absolutely work on that, but also too, just as I said in my previous slide, plant trees, just please plant more trees. And I would say too, Karin, if folks do have a beloved ash, I did find this year in spring that I did not see as much dieback as I had anticipated. And apparently trunk treating your ash tree is still efficacious until maybe like 20-ish% dieback. And so I would encourage folks, and you don't only have to treat them in the spring. You can treat kind of end of summer as it gets a little cooler. So if you have a big beloved ash tree, you can treat it like a really big one for like $250 once every 2 or 3 years. And, if you have a big stand of ash in your yard, or it's important to you or your neighbors, do consider that.
And is that what Metro is doing with the ashes in many of in the parks and such?
I really on the ash tree task force tried to encourage parks really as public education, right? Identifying this is an ash tree, it's being treated, you can treat yours too. I was not successful with that. I was like a broken record asking them to do that. I think I don't know if Mary Beth knows this number, but I think Mr. Lance said maybe they're treating like 5 of them or something across the park system. So that's somewhat disappointing to me, but I do think maybe that they made an effort to find a few that were just really heritage noteworthy, sizable, or maybe just how they were situated. They were particularly noteworthy or approximate to a facility, and they wanted to retain it. So a little work was done in that regard. I wish we had done more. It was not for lack of me trying.
I just, another aside, I recently read an article that the entire state of South Carolina has banned Bradford pears. So at a preemptive level,
Right.
could in fact,
That's good
argue
preemption. Hey.
South Carolina is ahead of us. It seems to me that we need to start working on that.
Yes, well, you are not. So one of the other tree bills that I delivered was elevating our tree density requirements on multifamily and commercial development. Also, as part of that, there was a mature tree retention incentive. You couldn't get all your credit out of retaining trees because, to your point about trees over time, we did want to have new trees planted as well. There was also a parking minimum reduction. If you could save mature trees, you would not have to have as many parking spaces. So, that legislation, I do know for a fact with the tree approved list, nobody can do a brand new development and pop in Bradford trees. Like, it's not going to happen anymore. Nobody, I mean, some people may be putting them in their own yard, but even now, I think it's pretty widely known that like those are just, they create the calorie pair and they create problems and they break a lot and, so boo hiss Bradford pears.
Yeah, I hate Bradford pears and what they do when they make those yes. pears with those big
thorns. Yep.
Love to get rid of those. So I do know that there has been a back and forth about, again, another scoring of around walking to school in public schools. I believe that the person who asked the question, Alan Dooley, is still here. Alan, would you like to pose the point that you made, or if you hear me? He's on the phone.
I will tell Alan it absolutely does prioritize a capital project. Proximity to school is a prioritization score. Yep. Hi, Alan.
Hi. Yeah, this was several years back, and I don't know if this is the way they still score sidewalk walkability, but this is the Metro was scoring. I don't know what department it was then. I guess now it's Public Works, but they only gave private schools half the weight of a public school. And the thought, I suppose, would be that everybody drives their kid to a private school, but that was not the case in my neighborhood, where there are a lot of walkers to Akiva and St. Henry. So I just believe that ought to be changed and not given a blanket score like that.
I will check on that. Do you know, was that, I mean, are we talking like way back kind of the Purcell Dean prioritization, or was this?
Boy, it could have been way back then. And I don't know if
prioritization, I'll just tell you, Alan, I was volunteering in the Green Hills area around the urban village plan and trying to make Green Hills more walkable. And so we were using their scoring rubric. And so we had a road that connected Lipscomb University with a commercial district, went past a public high school and a library and a United States Post Office. And it didn't even score right? And so we went to a community meeting and there was a public works director and Bill Purcell, and we were like, look at your scoring rubric, you've misscored this thing, that was back in the day. I've not, I'll inquire about that. I don't know the answer to that. That was not my impression. I can see how, at an immediately approximate distance or surrounding that school, to Mary Beth's point earlier, if there's a new capital investment in that school, we're going to make sure they're doing those sidewalks. Just as far as kind of municipal dollars and keeping everybody safe, I can sort of see tiering in, those public schools first. But I will inquire on that, and I can get back to you, Alan. I've got your email. So,
thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you, Alan, for coming in.
I was just going to offer on that, Karen, that I think Angie's right. In the plan, if it's a school, it's just coded as a school, not public versus private. But I'm going to put in the chat a TED Talk by a friend of ours, a former colleague of mine, Erin Hafkinshiel, who was at Vanderbilt for a while. And she tells an anecdote about a very precarious near miss in the middle of an intersection involving a mother and a child. And I believe Vanderbilt sponsored putting some cameras up at that intersection that could accurately gather pedestrian counts to try to make the case for some infrastructure and signal improvements at that intersection. So even a very serious safety situation, some of our engineers need to be shown that PED counts are high, because we simply do not have good data on PED counts. It's very easy to get data on vehicular counts because you just lay a tube in the middle of the street. But we have only, you're kind of taking people's word for it in a lot of locations on just how high of an activity center an area is. And the city's grown so much that they're just not going to have accurate PED counts in a lot of situations. So, if St. Henry wanted to potentially throw up a camera, because I think Vanderbilt, in the case that she cites in her TED Talk, is who sponsored that. There might be some legislative approvals that you need to go through just around surveillance. It shouldn't be that big of a deal, but I just want to offer that we really need accurate counts of pedestrians in some of these locations.
Yeah, and I think too, Mary Beth, I know you know this well, but so often what's challenging about it is there's a latent demand. Nobody's walking there because there's not the infrastructure. It's not that people would not want to walk there, but they might feel unsafe doing so, right? And that's a lot about what we say about, building bikeways, or people will be like, well, there's nobody in that bike lane you built. I'm like, that's because it's only 3 feet wide with a stripe of paint, and I'm not biking in that bike lane. So that's not really proof of need. And Mary Beth is exactly right. Yes, we need to garner that bike PED count data as best we can. But I also am on the other side, kind of pushing that, like, look, it's a school. Look at the residential density. Look at the proximity to transit. Look at these other trip generators. It's kind of got to be both and, so.
Yeah, I totally agree. A lot of times it can be an excuse, not to pay attention to an area. There's not enough people using this facility, but I know specifically, I live off Fawns Gap, so I know what Alan is talking about, and there are a lot of pedestrians in this area.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
Well, you all, it's now 1:30-ish past, and this has been fantastic. And I did mention to Angie that I was going to, one question that didn't even come up had to do with flooding mitigation and what plans Nashville is doing, Davidson County, and given some of the floods that have happened actually in Tennessee generally, maybe what Tennessee's doing with respect to that. I think what I might do, Angie, is just ask if you have any suggestions for someone who could speak to us about that. That would be very nice, because that is another request that has come in from our group, being very concerned about like the next flood. What we're doing.
I'll be interested to learn. I've had kind of mixed results. I'm going to be frank in engaging stormwater staff for educational kind of community flooding related meetings. I think there is some good systemic work being done around meters in our various bodies of water and those data sources to go online for people to kind of get ahead of and track from a safety perspective. There is a app, I think there's some federal funding, right? There's a place to kind of go and see, ooh, the Harpeth's coming up, or, this river, that river. So I know there's been some kind of good technical data work. I know there's some stuff on the nonprofit partner side where we're putting some kind of trash catchers. I think is that in the Mill Creek?
I think that's on White's Creek.
Okay. But they kind of float, and they're sort of a net, but it sort of catches that stuff that might in the future dam up the river from a trash perspective. And so, I feel like there's some good work happening, but I don't really feel like I know, like there's a gentleman at Stormwater, he does a really excellent job on kind of the environmental clean water side of things. He's a very good presenter. He kind of understands the needs of the community. I feel like we don't quite have that in the flooding space. Somebody that I consider to be, great folks on staff, but they're not necessarily good kind of communicators in this type venue.
Right.
And I think, they're going to probably need that because people are really concerned about it. And, I don't know if I'm looking at Mary Beth. I'm like, I don't know if she has any ideas on that front. I mean, there's lots of good folks at water, but they have sort of a discrete space of trees or, the Smart Yards initiative and the runoffs and the environmental stuff. That gentleman, he does a great job on his presenting, but just somebody presenting on the larger kind of flood partnership work, state funding, like there's some good work going on there, I think, at the state level. And I don't know really who's leading on that.
Yeah, I did know someone at the Corps who was very involved in modeling for the large scale events that would happen on the Cumberland and actually from the Ohio, the whole huge watershed, that basically, but I'm not sure that I don't know if they're speaking about that any longer, but that certainly is an issue because we have a reservoir that if it went, we're all going to be under 10 feet of water. So
yeah, there's a guy at Water named Roger Shirley who I think his name's Roger Shirley, that does a lot of the coordination with FEMA.
Yeah.
And just making sure we're ready for the next, 500 or 1,000-year event. But you might be interested to speak with a woman named Janie Camp at Vanderbilt. She does a lot around resilience planning and particularly just, readying our infrastructure for resilience planning. And so it has looked a lot at the flood predictors in the area. And she's also,
fantastic.
Really knowledgeable about stormwater mitigation plans and techniques. But, just circling back to what we were saying earlier about trees, Angie did some great legislation on, when a new subdivision goes in on cluster lot provisions, like making sure they can't just clear cut everything, because I'll tell you, down in the Antioch area where they're building that Century Farms project, I mean, it looks like something out of a Dr. Seuss book where they just took out literally everything. And the council members for that area will tell you, as a result, streets are now flooding to the point of being impassable. So that has immediate effects when you take out trees, because they're drinking a tremendous amount of water when it rains.
Yeah. And I think, staff as well is working a lot of, you absolutely always have to improve your policy and your requirements, but so much of it is internal as to the implementation of the policy, right? And you have to look at where are process flaws, right? And can we improve this as an internal process? And so our grading review process and where that kind of fits in development plans review is not really optimal for what we're trying to achieve from a stormwater and forest retention standpoint. So that's something I know that that staff is working on now. We did, this planning director's credit. She has hired 2 tree policy specific positions. And so, they are looking at that. That's who I worked with on the conservation development bill. So I know there is some intention in this space. And I think that's probably my only kind of regret as I come to the end of this term limited with just 1 year left. I had hoped, to achieve a little bit more around parking policy, some land use there, and really get into the stormwater regs in that single and 2 family space. And, maybe we'll still get it done. But on the stormwater side, there's just the cycle of that, of kind of putting those changes out to public comment. And, you know, the last time we updated our stormwater regs, that was kind of before my time, and that was 2014. And, you know, no pun intended, they got kind of watered down through the stakeholder process in my view. And so, you know, as we legislate, it's, especially again in this preemptive environment, just to kind of pull this to a conclusion, is you really have to kind of find that line, right? You cannot legislate in fear of preemption and thus under deliver, but you can't really go big, go home. And then you're going to put the whole thing asunder anyway, and they'll take away your ability to even regulate the space. So finding that, hitting that mark is very challenging, but it's very important for us to be able to achieve what we want to achieve. And so, you know, I think the next time we update the stormwater regs, we're going to need to push a little bit more, but I think the time is here, right? Everybody is seeing the flooding. Everybody is seeing the major storm events. And that might not have been true in 2014. So, you know, when the home builder community and others push back on what might be some new provisions, and it's in all things, especially in Tennessee, you've got to balance carrots and sticks, choices, options, a menu of things, you know, retain these trees to get this and that. It's an important space, and I hope my colleagues and I will have time to address it before our year's out.
Maybe one other thing you could do is clone yourself in the final year. So Angie too could run again. But thank you, Angie. This has been absolutely fantastic. And there's like the 7 of us who are here who have like
we're all the nerds who stayed and are like, let's just keep talking policy.
Oh, it's so nerdy. We love nerds.
I've got to click on the boxes. I've only ever been able to see like 4 people here, so I've got to